There we go. Good evening.
Good evening.
Glad we found you. We had a little glitch there.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, I'm gonna remind attendees, to please fill out the form that's in the chat or the website and give us feedback. Welcome to our third and final interview for this evening. This interview will be with Dr. Rene Sanchez. Dr. Sanchez, welcome. Thank you for being with us this evening. You are a doctor, correct?
I actually am not. I am still in the process. I do have that's all right. I'm in the process.
Right, Mr. Sanchez.
Yes, that'll work.
Okay. So thank you for being with us this evening. Following the interview questions, you will have the opportunity to make concluding remarks and ask a question if time allows. We've had the opportunity to review your resume. Please tell us how your background and experiences make you a good fit to be our next superintendent.
Thank you, President Lawrence. I'm very excited about this opportunity to serve as the next superintendent of Lansing. My experience, I've been a high school principal for, it's about 12 years. And then over the last 2 years, I have been an assistant superintendent in South Bend, Indiana. Prior to that, I served as a college readiness coordinator in Austin ISD, and I have served for 7 years as a teacher of English and a teacher of social studies. So I've been in the classroom. I've helped students outside of the classroom trying to get into college. I've served as baseball, softball, football coaches, and most recently in South Bend, I have overseen human resources and I've overseen transportation. So by being able to serve in those two capacities, I've been fortunate to work with employees, teachers, and other staff coming into the district, as well as negotiating their contracts and also providing regular transportation, as well as closing the digital divide as part of our Wi-Fi bus processes here in South Bend.
Thank you. Please share an example of a time you have led a sustained multi-year improvement initiative. Be specific regarding the situation, the task at hand, your specific role, and the outcome.
So I will highlight two as a high school principal at Chavez High School in Houston, Texas, where we had a population that swelled to the 3,290 students. While we were there, 90% free or reduced lunch, we were able to not only begin, but also to implement and graduate students through an international baccalaureate diploma program over the course of 5 years. So we started the process, went through authorization, were able to recruit teachers, were able to recruit students to ensure and basically to assuage fears as we transferred from largely AP school to an all IB school. And over the course of the authorization and the implementation in our very first year of being able to graduate students, we were able to graduate 9. We would have had a 10th. Unfortunately, we had one pass away during the middle of the year. At the same time, we went wall to wall career and technical education. We were able to have 4 separate pathways where we were able to take a school that only had less than 10% of their seniors graduating with a certificate or a sequenced pathway to nearly 70% of the students graduating with a coherent sequence.
Managing vision and purpose involves anticipating future trends, creating a compelling vision, and communicating that vision. Describe a situation that conveys your capability in this area.
I'd like to highlight 2. So first, I'd like to go back to the International Baccalaureate program that we began at Chavez High School. First, not only did we have a diploma program, but 1 year later, we were able to authorize a career program as well, since we had so many students graduating with their CTE license, certificate, or pathway. Not only did we do that there, but we were able to convince a middle school and an elementary in our vertical team to also follow the IB pathway. So by starting one at middle school, them getting their middle years program, we now will have a dedicated graduating class of 25, 26 that will graduate students who went through the MYP and DP. And in 35, 36, we will have students who will have began in PYP and then graduated with DP. The second thing I would like to highlight is the Wi-Fi buses that we started in South Bend prior to the pandemic. It started off as an idea of trying to close the digital divide between our students who had long bus rides in the morning, students who were going on athletic trips, and knowing that we had just moved to a one-to-one initiative at the secondary level. Fortunately, they were deployed before the pandemic hit. And as soon as the pandemic hit, we were able to get, when we closed our schools down, we were able to deploy them to apartment complexes, parks, and other locations where students were able to begin e-learning on the second day after the school closed down. So we were able to make sure that there was a very short gap in the learning process.
Please tell us what the term culturally competent means to you. Give an example of how you demonstrate this characteristic and your experience in bringing a diverse group of people to consensus on a difficult issue.
Thank you for this question. So culturally competent to me means that somebody who is able to navigate the differences among people that we would encounter in our everyday workplace, in our everyday school, and even just going to the market. So in reviewing Lansing's data, just being able to see that we have so many languages, up to 30 languages spoken within our schools, we have to be highly aware of the students that we as educators will be leading into the next decade. So it's important for us to know, or at least be willing to understand, the cultures that are in front of us. So for me, it's being willing and able to live in the present and really being willing to speak to people about what I perceive, about how, if there is an issue that needs to be addressed immediately, let's say there's a situation where there appears to be an inequity or an injustice or a process or a system that the school district has in place, we need to address that immediately. It can't just be allowed to continue. And so to gather consensus in that process would mean that we would have to find out how that system or inequity began and then work together as a team to see what could be the best outcome, because at the end of the day, we need to improve the education and the system for our students.
Tell us how you maintain visibility and accessibility for staff, parents, and community groups.
So visibility to me means presence. And so when I was the high school principal at Chavez, every morning I would start off, I would have a morning walk where I would walk my 1.4 miles around my building, just making sure that I greeted students who were sitting by themselves, just in case they didn't have a chance to speak to an adult for the rest of the day. I would make sure that I would stop by if teachers were out there at their doors, greeting them, making sure that if there was anything that I could provide for them, that I would be there for them. It was also extremely important to go to athletic events, to fine arts events. And so that way I could talk to those students later when I was doing cafeteria duty. I could say, hey, I saw you in the play last night, or that was a nice play on the court or on the pitch, so that way they would know that I was in the stands. With regards to parents, as the high school principal there, we made sure that we had a monthly coffee with the principal where not only would I be the person speaking, but we would bring in other important members of the school, as well as legislators and other members of the community, so that way they could share what's going on. Now here in South Bend, what I've been able to do is join several organizations like Junior Achievement, like Rotary. I volunteer at one of the local hospitals for the vaccine distribution, so that way I can be able to bring that information back to our employees.
Often we learn from successfully facing challenges or experiencing mistakes or failures. Please share a time when this was the case for you. What did you learn from the experience? How did you apply what you learned?
So one of my experiences as a first year principal a long time ago was as I was doing professional development, I planned on showing a video that was going to bring us together as a faculty to show that we were all in this together. And some of you might be aware of it. It's the wonderful scene from Miracle, where the coach has the young skaters skating back and forth across the ice until they're able to say, who do you play for? And the answer, Eruzione eventually said, the United States of America. And so I showed that clip without context. So unfortunately, as I was presenting that to my staff and to my teachers, they took that a myriad different ways. They took it as I'm going to be working them really hard, or I was going to force them to lose their identity. But at that time, we were trying to bring a school together that had kind of been piecemealed from three different components. And so it took me a long time to realize, I think when I'm going to be providing professional development, or when I'm going to be providing an argument or leading a discussion, I need to be able to provide that context before I move on and just merely assume that everybody's thinking what I'm thinking.
Please describe how you would work to create a learning and working environment that is welcoming, inclusive, and increasingly diverse. How would you make sure that this is supported across the district and community?
So this harkens back to the visibility question that was brought up earlier. It's going to be really important for me to be in the schools. It's going to be important for my staff to either be in the schools with me or also reporting back to me what they saw in the schools. As the community continues to get more diverse, and in looking at the demographics of Lansing, demographics of the city itself, there is a younger population that is starting to grow. They may not all be in Lansing schools yet, but it's going to be increasingly important for us to mount a recruiting strategy so we can keep those families in our schools. And if in order to do that, we have to make them welcome. So how we go about doing that is making sure that they see that the students who are already there, the word of mouth is getting out. Oh, superintendent's around. The teachers are very welcoming. The principal's very welcoming. It's important for us to make sure that we bring those students, given that we've lost several thousand students over the last few years, and we want to make sure that they're coming back as these groups of students are getting older. So that being said, the other piece that is critically important is if we can't just be welcoming, we also have to be successful. So in order to be successful, there's one way we can follow the state's accountability system and keep improving there, making sure that our kids are doing well on the tests, graduating on time. But at the same time, we also have to make sure that those, especially now post-COVID, that we're providing that social emotional learning, that making sure that they are well as they come back into our schools, because that will not only keep them there, it will keep them on track to graduate.
Forgot to unmute myself. First time tonight. How do you recruit, develop, and lead a management team? Give us an example of how you've done this in the past.
Oh, thank you so much for this question. So right now, let me go back a little further. So for me, it's really important to know where, I guess, my leadership has come from. So I have many mentors, some in Texas, some here in Indiana, and some all across this country. And as a result, for me, it's watching them lead. And so because what I've been able to see them do is how I am working and coaching the team that I have. So it's important for me to mentor those that are going to come behind me, because I've been so fortunate to have mentors helping me through my leadership time. So the first thing, should I be selected, is to start reading material, books that we can come together, not just the cabinet level officials, but also the principals and the assistant principals, so that way that the vision of the school board, the vision and my vision can come together, so that way we are leading the way that we should lead. And so in leading in the past, again, I go back to taking on the mantle when I was in Houston. There were some issues with, I guess the best way to put it is, we were not being as inclusive in giving students the opportunity to earn credit in order to graduate. So myself, I led a group of principals who approached the superintendent, and we asked him, is it possible for us to, if we were to allow students, if their grades averaged to 70 over both semesters, that they would be able to graduate? And so it took some time, but we were able to come up with a language. We were able to do the research of the school districts in Texas that were allowing that to take place. And based on that information, the superintendent agreed to it. We presented to the board, and the board agreed with us and let us pass that particular policy.
Describe how you go about engaging and affirming staff members, union members, and union leadership.
So with staff members, visibility, presence, informal and formal conversations are extremely important. So checking in with staff members. So if I'm leading my cabinet team, making sure that I have quarterly formal meetings with them, and then weekly staff meetings with them. If it's principals, making sure that I'm present at the principal meetings that take place and visiting their campuses on a regular basis. With teachers, making sure that the principal and I, or just me, walking around the buildings, whether it's at the beginning of school or end of school, making sure that I'm visible and meeting with them. With union members and union leadership, particularly, let me start with union leadership, is making sure that we have that regular meeting set, whether it's our monthly maintenance or it's phone calls when we know that something is coming up, so we can either get feedback or at least giving them a heads up, because sometimes decisions need to be made on the spot. And if we do that, even though it might be outside of the bargaining or the negotiation, the discussion or the negotiation items, it's always good for them to have a heads up that something's happening. With the union members, again, it's about being present and making sure that I'm keeping their union leadership informed.
How do you go about making decisions on controversial issues?
So I think a lot, I reflect a lot. And so that means I'm going to go about, so if I know that the controversial issue is coming up, then I try to do the background research ahead of time so that I know how to address it when it does take place. If it happens instantaneously, then I have to go with what's best for the students, what's best for the staff and faculty, and what's best for the district. So if it's a crisis, have to keep people safe, make sure that the district is safe. And then at the same time, if it's something that is going to be prolonged, that I'm getting as much feedback from stakeholders for whom this controversial issue is going to affect. So if the board is going to have an opinion on it, I'm going to want to be sure to reach out to all 9 individually. If it's something that we can discuss in closed session or prior to a board meeting, that's even better. But it's something that I will always make sure that if it's an emergency issue, the board will be notified. And then if it's something that we can plan together, the board will help in the process for negotiating it.
Tell us what budget development process you use and how you gain broad support for the final result.
So part of this, so part of the budget development process in this case is realizing the money that we have that's coming to us as a result, from whether it's from the state, from the county, or from the federal government, and then finding out what are our needs. Right now, I can see that we're operating not necessarily at a deficit because we still have a decent fund balance, but we have to make sure that the money that we are allocating is going to go to our most needy needs. And so however we're trying to improve our schools, however we're trying to assist our students, especially post-COVID, it's going to be really important for us to allocate the money in the right place. Fortunately, there is going to be a CARES 2 grant, so we'll be able to recover some of our expenses that we had to use in order to cover during COVID. I guess the second round, but that is going to be incredibly important. The next piece is whether it's our first year or the second year, making sure that our budgetary needs are aligned to the strategic plan. The last strategic plan that I was able to find ended in 2019. And so we're going to have to come up with a new one so that way we are able to account for raising our schools, not only their current letter grades, but their letter grades into the future, so that way we're compliant with what the state is asking us to do.
What does an effective relationship between the board and superintendent look like, and how do you cultivate such a relationship?
So the cultivation takes place through lots of communication, and that communication can come, again, informally and formally as we set up not only our regular board meetings, our regular board retreats, and just our informal conversations that we have on a weekly basis. So there will also be my board notes that I will send to you every week, so you'll know that those will be consistent and also coming from me and from my team. But I think in running the school district, it's going to be really important that we have a culture of high expectations, not only for the students, but also for the staff. Then once we have that culture of high expectations, is that we have a shared vision that we're able to not only show to our stakeholders, but that's something that we talk about, and we share that with as many people as we can find. And when we make a decision, sometimes it's going to be a controversial one. Sometimes it's one that's not going to be very pleasant. But as long as we're able to talk it through and communicate and stick together on that decision, then the relationship will just get stronger through that trust.
Tell us about your experience in the development and implementation of one specific program change or initiative. What processes did you use? How did you involve others and provide support for sustaining this initiative?
Okay, I will go back to the CTE the wall-to-wall CTE implementation. So my superintendent in my first year there in Houston, he applied for a Race to the Top grant that was dedicated to just a district. So we were able to create, I guess we were given the backdrop where we could take the resources that we had in our building, along with a few extra $1,000, and begin the training of our teachers to where we had not only CTE courses, but we also had a set of core content teachers that were aligned with those courses. So what it took for us to make that happen, first of all, we had to have the training to go with what's the CTE teacher's responsibility and what are the core content teacher's responsibility. So once we established that and had that training, then we had to go to the master schedule and construct the master schedule into 4 separate houses, one for engineering, one for environmental science, one for health science, and one for technology/graphic design. So that meant that every student from 10th through 12th was now going to be enrolled in one of these houses. So it took a decent amount of energy to try to convince not only the people on the campus, but also at the school district level that this is something that a 3,000 person school could actually do. But we were able to pull it off because we were able to produce so many more students with licenses and certificates. And just kind of an example, or two main examples. One, we created a associate's degree for process technology, something that didn't exist in Houston ISD before. And we had the 6th largest FFA membership in all of the state of Texas, with over 600 students in a school in the middle of the city. And we also had by the time I left Houston, we were creating 50 farm techs from one school every year. So once we were able to show how successful it could be, the students bought in and the teachers bought in.
What unique skills or experience do you bring to this position, and how will the Lansing School District be served by this?
So I go back to my first administrative position was that of overseeing all of the college counselors in Austin ISD. So from that experience, I have learned the importance of being able to identify the needs that students must have in order to be successful. And so what I am trying to bring to Lansing is this identification of, if we're waiting till students are in high school to prepare them for college and career, it's too late. We have to start building that pipeline probably all the way back to prior to 3rd grade. We have to keep the students in school, and we have to keep them engaged through that kind of mysterious middle school time period, so that way, by the time they get to high school, they're very engaged. They've discovered something that they really enjoy, whether it's science, math, writing, theater, music, sports, any one of those things, to keep them in school, so that way we are able to make sure that they're coming to school every day. We're able to feed them, we're able to care for them, and most importantly, we're able to graduate them so that they can pursue those things that they love.
How your previous professional experiences in the classroom have influenced you as a leader.
So I guess let me go all the way back to the beginning, but then so when I was a teacher, we did a lot of writing, I did a lot of lecturing, and I was an okay teacher. But something happened to me when I was in my second year at Chavez High School. I discovered, because we won a grant to do it, something called Universal Design for Learning. And Universal Design for Learning is a different way of looking at instruction. Universal Design for Learning is trying to serve all of the students in the classroom, including those in the margins, by designing the lesson from the very beginning to take those students into account. Traditionally, when people speak of differentiation, they start off, they think of, well, I need a different lesson for my special education students, my ELLs, maybe my 504, and other students. But what Universal Design for Learning says is that you have one lesson, and you've built in to that lesson, whether it's how the students are getting it, how the students are giving it back to the teacher, or how they're engaging in the lesson, and all of those student groups are already accounted for in the lesson. So once I was able to understand that we are really teaching learners who vary from desk to desk, brains that have tremendous amount of variability, that changed how I began to lead. Because now, I was going to say it, but now I'm going to say it. It is awesome that you have the text visible, because closed captioning is one of the ways that Universal Design for Learning will help others. So if a student they're maybe too far from the board and it's able to pop up on their screen, or they're not able to hear their teacher. They can see it read. I know when I'm watching TV, I have to have captions on now. It drives my kids crazy. But for me, it's incredibly important to be able to have that second measure that allows me to be able to engage in a conversation or engage in the learning that's taking place. So that text is a perfect example of what I'm talking about when it comes to universal design for learning.
Having the text on the screen was a heavier lift than I care to admit. What would you consider to be the single biggest obstacle to improving student academic achievement?
This is a great question. So I kind of hit on it earlier, but it's this idea that our students are part of a system. And so if the systems, let's say elementary, middle, and high school, are disconnected, and we're only really trying to produce students who are successful in elementary, students who are successful in middle school, students who are successful in high school, even to the point where they're only successful in this grade or in this class, we are never going to achieve great things for students. I say that because we should be designing it, again, from the very beginning. What is a pre-K student who's starting in Lansing next year? What should they expect when they get to grade 9? What should they expect when they get to their senior year? Those are things that we can start planning ahead and making sure that the communication takes place between the pre-K 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in some schools 6, 7, 8, and then all the way from 7 to 12. Having those structures are going to help the students really do better than if they were 3 separate total levels. But that conversation and that level of expectation and that uniformity to an extent must happen, because if your 7th grade and 8th grade teachers are teaching one way of writing, or they're using a different form of math vocabulary, then they get to 9th grade year and it changes. Now all of a sudden you have a disconnect, and it's going to take time for those students to learn that information.
We appreciate your interest in becoming our next superintendent. Do you have any questions for me? Anything that we haven't talked about?
I guess I had several written down. So is the large drop, or is the expectation that the students will return next year once more people have access to a vaccine, once it becomes more common for people to return?
We certainly hope so. We are starting to bring students back March 22nd. Mm-hmm. Not everyone on March 22nd, but we'll start with younger grades and phase that in. It will be optional. Parents can choose to remain virtual if that's what they would like to do. Of course, the goal is that everybody's back in school in person as quickly as possible.
Wonderful. Has the board already begun the process for creating a new strategic plan based on the previous one ending in 2019?
We had begun that process, similar to how we had begun the process of hiring a new superintendent, and then the pandemic started. That process has been on the back burner, and we are looking forward to restarting that process as soon as possible. We know that it's when the board works on a strategic plan, it tends to be a pretty long conversation, and it's not something that's really easy to do via Zoom. So we've been kind of hoping that we can do that in person, and just kind of waiting to see, do we have a new superintendent? Can we use our current superintendent and the new superintendent and do it in person? And we're just maybe dragging our feet a little bit because we want to use our time appropriately and also be able to put a lot of thought into the process.
What are the top 2 or 3 things that you believe the board will task the superintendent to attack? Yeah, what are your priorities?
Improving student academic achievement. Hands down.
Hands down. Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, that in itself, I think that it will be challenging, but when there is a shared vision among the board and the superintendent and the others, that it can definitely be done.
I think so too. Well, Mr. Sanchez, we appreciate your interest in our superintendent position. The board is interviewing a number of candidates, and we will contact you if you are selected as a finalist. Thank you so much for coming. We have enjoyed meeting with you.
Okay. Thank you so much.